The receptionist sat confidently behind her sleek, modern desk, tapping away at her keyboard while occasionally glancing at the entrance. It was just another day in the office, and she relished her self-proclaimed role as the unofficial gatekeeper. She prided herself on her quick wit, her ability to read people, and, above all, her sharp tongue. She had seen all kinds walk through those doors, business moguls, politicians, influencers, but to her, they were all the same. People who thought they were important. People who, in her mind, deserved to be taken down a peg. And today, she saw another one stroll in, someone she recognized immediately. With a slight smirk curling at the corner of her lips, she straightened up, already rehearsing her opening line. She had read plenty about her in the media, seen her name tossed around in political debates, and had her own strong opinions. Not that she expected much of a challenge. After all, in her mind, these people always folded under the weight of well-placed sarcasm. She barely looked up as she greeted her in a dry, dismissive tone. "Oh, wow, didn't expect to see you here. Thought you were too busy trying to, take us back to the dark ages." The words were laced with faux amusement, as if it were just harmless banter. She glanced up to gauge the reaction. Nothing. Just a polite smile. Unfazed. That irritated her. Most people would at least shift uncomfortably, try to explain themselves, or laugh nervously, but the expression across from her remained calm, composed. That wouldn't do. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Gotta say, I always wonder what it's like waking up in the morning, looking in the mirror, and thinking, yeah, let's push some outdated nonsense today. Must be an interesting life." Still nothing. Just that same calm gaze, the kind that saw right through her. She felt an odd sense of unease creeping in, but she wasn't done. She had an audience, her coworkers nearby who she knew shared her views. She could sense their quiet amusement, their approval of her jabs. That gave her confidence. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a joke. "I mean, honestly, I'm surprised they even let you in here. This place is a little too progressive for your kind, don't you think?" The words hung in the air. It was no longer just sarcasm. It was a deliberate attempt to provoke, to establish superiority. And yet the response she received was not anger, not frustration, but something far worse. Silence. Not the kind of silence that signaled defeat, but the kind that carried weight. The kind that made the air feel heavier, the room feel smaller. The kind that turned the smirks from her nearby coworkers into uncertain glances. That composed expression hadn't changed, but now there was something behind it. A quiet confidence, a patience that said, "I've heard worse. You're not the first. You won't be the last." For the first time, the receptionist felt something unexpected, a flicker of doubt. Still, she wasn't going to back down. She let out a short, forced laugh. "Come on, lighten up, it's just a joke." But even as she said it, she knew she had lost control of the moment. The power she thought she held had vanished. And deep down, she knew. This was no joke. Not to the ones standing in front of her. Not to the people now watching in uncomfortable silence, and certainly not to the ones who would hear about this later. She stood there, poised and calm, not a flicker of irritation crossing her face. The words thrown her way were not just casual remarks. They were pointed, deliberate, and meant to provoke. Yet she didn't flinch. She had been in situations like this before, many times in fact. It was nothing new. She knew the game. People who thought they held power in the moment, mistaking arrogance for intelligence. They assumed she would react emotionally, maybe lash out, maybe stumble over a response. That was what they wanted. But she had learned long ago that silence, patience, and the right words carried far more weight than outrage. The receptionist, sitting comfortably in her chair, had expected a reaction by now. A defensive tone, a huff of annoyance, maybe even an argument. But none came. Instead, there was only a measured pause, as if considering whether or not this situation even deserved a response. That moment of quiet, so small yet so intentional, shifted something in the air. And then, she spoke. Her voice was steady, unwavering. There was no bitterness, no frustration. If anything, there was an almost effortless confidence in the way she carried herself. "You know," she said, tilting her head slightly, "I've met a lot of people who think belittling others makes them look clever, but I've never seen it actually work." There was no venom in her tone, no sharp edges, just a simple, undeniable truth, one that cut deeper than any insult could. The receptionist's smirk faltered for just a second. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A flicker of realization that she had miscalculated. But she wasn't about to let that show. With a forced laugh, she leaned back, brushing it off. "Oh, come on. You can take a joke, right?" She smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile that signaled agreement. It was the kind of smile that said, "I see exactly what you're doing, and it's not working." "A joke?" she repeated, as if considering the word carefully. "Interesting, because usually a joke is meant to be funny, not just a way to make someone else feel small." There was no need to raise her voice. No need to match the receptionist's smugness. Instead, she let her words settle in the space between them, giving them room to land. The receptionist shifted slightly in her chair, the weight of the conversation changing in real time. It wasn't going the way she had planned. She had expected someone who would get flustered, defensive, someone who would play into her hand. Instead, she found herself in a moment she couldn't control. One of the other employees nearby, who had been half listening, now looked fully engaged. The smirk they had worn earlier had faded, replaced by something else. She continued, still calm, still unbothered. "I'm sure you think what you're saying is harmless. But here's the thing. Words matter. And the way we treat people, even in small moments like these, says a lot about who we are." That was the moment everything changed. The receptionist blinked, her confidence slipping just slightly. The room felt different now, the energy shifting. The same words that had once carried the weight of mockery now felt small in comparison to the response they had received. It wasn't about making a scene. It wasn't about firing back with anger. It was about something far more effective, grace under fire. And nothing unsettled someone more than realizing their attempts to rattle. Another person had not only failed, but had backfired entirely. By the time she arrived at work the next morning, the energy in the office had shifted. Something was different, though the receptionist couldn't quite put her finger on it at first. The usual chatter among her coworkers felt restrained, almost cautious. A few of them exchanged glances when she walked past, their smiles tight, their greetings shorter than usual. She ignored it at first, assuming it was just another slow morning. Maybe someone had messed up a report, or there had been an issue with a client. Office politics were always swirling, and she had learned to tune out most of it. But as she settled into her chair at the front desk, she started to notice things she hadn't before. The manager walked by without so much as a nod. One of the assistants who usually stopped to chat barely acknowledged her. Even the intern, who always laughed at her jokes, avoided eye contact. Something was definitely off. She opened her email, scrolling through the usual morning messages, a few client updates, a reminder about an upcoming meeting, and then a forwarded email from HR. Her stomach tightened as she clicked it open. The subject line was vague, but the contents were not. It was a formal request to meet with HR and senior management immediately. No details, no explanations, just a time, which was in less than 10 minutes. A nervous chuckle escaped her lips as she reread the message. This had to be a mistake. Or maybe just some routine check-in. After all, she was good at her job. She handled clients well, most of them anyway. She had been here for years, and if anything, she thought of herself as one of the more respected employees. Still, something gnawed at the back of her mind as she gathered her things and made her way toward the office. When she stepped inside, the atmosphere was even heavier than before. The HR director sat with her hands folded neatly on the desk, her expression unreadable. Next to her, the senior manager leaned back slightly, watching her with a measured gaze. The receptionist tried to keep her composure, flashing a casual smile. "So, what's this about?" The HR director sighed, pushing a printed document forward. "We received a complaint regarding your behavior yesterday." The receptionist's stomach dropped. She quickly recovered, forcing a chuckle. "Oh, come on. A complaint? Over what? A harmless joke?" Neither of them laughed. The senior manager adjusted his glasses. It wasn't perceived as harmless. The weight of the words hit harder than she expected. She opened her mouth to defend herself, to brush it off, but something stopped her. The looks on their faces told her everything. This wasn't just a simple reprimand. She picked up the document in front of her, scanning the contents. It was a formal write-up, detailing her comments, her behavior, and how it had been received. Not just by the person she had directed them at, but by others in the office, witnesses, co-workers. The realization dawned slowly. People had talked. She swallowed hard. "I didn't mean anything by it," she said, her voice quieter now. "It was just..." The HR director cut her off gently. "It's not just about intent. It's about impact." The words settled in the air, and for the first time, the receptionist felt a creeping sense of regret. Not just because she had been called out, but because she was starting to understand just how badly she had misjudged the situation. The senior manager leaned forward. "We have a standard of professionalism here, and after reviewing this, we've decided it's best to part ways." Her breath caught in her throat. "Wait, you're firing me?" A pause. "We're letting you go." The difference in wording didn't matter. The meaning was the same. She stared at them, waiting for some sign that this was a warning, a slap on the wrist. But there was none. This was final. And as she sat there, realization sinking in, she couldn't help but think back to the moment that started it all. The moment she thought she had control of the situation. The moment she believed her words had power. But now, it was clear. She had been wrong. She had always believed she was untouchable, clever, sharp-witted, always knowing exactly what to say to get a laugh or an approving nod from the right people. It had worked for her for years, both in life and in the office. She understood how to read a room, how to push the line just enough to make a point, but not enough to face real consequences. That was until now. The silence in the HR office had been suffocating, the finality of their decision settling in like a weight she couldn't shake. She had been let go, dismissed with the same matter-of-fact professionalism she had so often disregarded in others. The walk back to her desk had been slow, each step heavier than the last. As she gathered her belongings, she felt the stares. Some coworkers avoided looking at her altogether, while others threw cautious glances her way. The ones who had once laughed at her jokes weren't laughing now. The ones who had nodded in agreement when she mocked others had suddenly gone quiet. The reality of it hit her in waves. She had thought she was speaking for the group, that her comments had been a reflection of what everyone was thinking, but wouldn't dare say out loud. But the truth was much simpler. People only cheered for cruelty when they believed they wouldn't have to face the consequences of it. And now that those consequences had come, there was no one standing beside her. She grabbed her coat, forcing herself to maintain an air of indifference. If she acted like she didn't care, maybe it would soften the humiliation. Maybe it would convince at least some of them that she was the victim of an overreaction. But deep down, she knew better. She had been so sure of herself, so certain that her words were harmless, that they carried no weight beyond a simple joke. But looking around now, seeing the way people avoided her, she realized something she had never truly considered before. Words had power. They could lift someone up, or they could tear them down. They could build trust, or they could erode it. And when used carelessly, they could reveal more about the speaker than the person they were aimed at. She thought back to the moment that had led to this, the way she had dismissed the encounter as nothing more than playful banter. But in truth, she had been the only one playing, and now she was the only one who had lost. She had seen it happen before, to others who had assumed their position, their reputation, or their alliances made them immune. She had watched them brush off warnings, laugh at complaints, and scoff at the idea that their words could come back to haunt them. And now she understood. Respect wasn't just about authority or job titles. It wasn't about who could deliver the sharpest insult or the most cutting remark. It was about how a person carried themselves, how they treated others when they thought no one was watching, or when they thought everyone was laughing along. She had underestimated that, and she had learned, far too late, that no one was untouchable. As she walked out of the office for the last time, the weight of what had happened settled fully on her shoulders. The confidence she had once carried, the smug assurance that she could say anything without consequences, had vanished. The world had a way of humbling people, often in the moments they least expected. She had spent so much time believing that her words were just jokes, harmless quips meant to entertain, that she never stopped to consider the impact they had on others. But now, she was forced to confront the truth. Respect wasn't optional. Professionalism wasn't a suggestion, and actions, especially words, always carried consequences. For years, she had mocked others, thinking she was simply speaking her mind, thinking she was standing on the right side of history. But what she had never considered was that true strength didn't come from tearing others down. It came from holding yourself to a higher standard, from knowing when to speak and when to listen, from understanding that kindness and respect were never signs of weakness. She had spent so long believing that being loud made her right. But in the end, it wasn't the volume of her voice that mattered. It was the substance behind it. And when she finally stopped to look back, she realized there hadn't been much substance at all. There was no one to blame but herself. As she stepped out onto the sidewalk, the world outside felt different. Not because it had changed, but because she had. The lesson had been a hard one, but it was one she would never forget. Words had power, and for the first time, she truly understood what that meant.